In the last video, we created a function called getTip%, which will get the percentage that the user selected. Now we need to use it. So let's first do it a real simple way. We could go through and say amount, and then it is equal to times getTip%. Because remember, getTip% returns a double. Amount is a double, right? We convert it to a double. So we just multiply the two together and output it on the screen. So let's test that. Put it over here on the screen, so I can do 123.45 and compute, and I get $12.345. Ooh, don't like that. Okay, so let's fix it. So to do that, we use a number formatter, and I could do it inside this little block of code, but that's, again, starting to get a little overly complicated. So let's just go ahead and create a new line, val tip amount, and that is equal to amount times get tip%. And then to round it, let's go back into here. Let's change the code here. To round this off, we want to round it to 2 decimal places. So we can use the string.format, and you may be familiar with this from Java. It's very similar. So we do dot, let's say 2f. So what we're saying is that it's a float. Usually on strings, people always do floats, but it's a number, and we want it to be to 2 decimal places. And then we pass in the tip amount. And so now it'll always round to 2 places. So we can go ahead and run again. And I'll enter 134.56, and we'll compute, and we'll see that it always keeps it at 2 decimals now. Okay, let's go. It's getting better. Another thing I don't like is the keyboard stays up. I think when I hit the computer, I should dismiss the keyboard. Right, makes sense. So let's fix that. So this is a little more complicated. I gotta figure out where I want to do it. Let's just do it as soon as, let's do it down here. Let's do it as soon as you hit the button. Let's dismiss it. Okay, so this is a little complicated, and what you're gonna find is that some things that we do are going to be, I call them cookie cutter. And what I mean by that is you don't really necessarily have to remember how to do this all the time. It's just you need to go look it up. So this is some code that you might want to save or keep track of. So I'm going to create a reference to the input manager. Input method manager. So this is a built-in object that is controlling all the input on the screen. And I need to get a reference to it, right? So I do it by doing get, if I can type, get system service, and then the service that we want is context context dot input method service as input method manager. Okay, so this seems a little bit more complicated than what it is, but what's happening here, right, is there's this thing called an input manager, and it's out there. And if we want to interact with it, in this case, we want to tell it to dismiss the keyboard, I need to get a hold of it somehow. So I can call the system service, here's the type, and then as I call it, I have to tell it, here's the data type that I want you to return the variable as. Because in this case, it could be system services or lots of different system services out there, as you can imagine. Okay, so now that I have a reference to it, I can say input manager dot hide soft input from window, and the window is the current focus, which may not exist, but it probably does. But just in case that it won't crash, I have to do that. So it's current Windows token. So this is just getting a reference to what is on the screen right now, because the keyboard is actually tied to the screen that's being displayed or the activity that's being displayed. So say, hey, go grab whatever's currently active. Then I want you to give me a reference to it, the token to it. And then now we go back to input method manager dot show forced, which just says, and you can look it up here, the following documentation, that you can look it up if you want, but it's just saying, yeah, make it happen. And that's it. So now every time I click the button, this is going to hide the keyboard. like I say, I wouldn't expect you to remember this, but know how to do it. So let's test to make sure it works. So come up here, I'll enter amount, and I'll say compute, and it dismisses the keyboard. Perfect. Okay, so getting pretty good. A couple other small things. This is really a dollar amount, right? So let's go back down here, and a dollar is how we show the string that it's getting ready to run some code. So if I just put a dollar sign in there, it's actually going to cause a problem. So I need to put an escape dollar to say just print a dollar sign. So there you go. So we've added the dollar. So it's all working now, but maybe let's clean the code up just a little bit. So for example, as you can imagine, dismissing the keyboard is something that you might want to do in other places if the app gets a little more complicated. So it probably makes sense to go out and create a function for that. So we'll create a private function called dismiss keyboard. Now let's just go grab this code, move it down here. And then now we say here, dismiss keyboard. Good. Also, this is our on create. And there's things I have to do. I need to set up my click listener on create. But as you can imagine, if I had multiple buttons, I wouldn't want to have that could make this function gigantic and really hard to read. So I'm not a fan of putting a bunch of code in the on-click listener. What I prefer to do is to come down and create some functions that will act as my function for the click listener. So let's do private fun button compute on click. And now let's just go grab all this code and move it down here. And now we can say, what do we want to do when that happens? Well, we just want to do button compute on click. That is a much simpler and easier to understand procedure. I like to have space there. Easier to read in my opinion. Okay. So now let's just make sure I didn't break anything. It's always a good idea to make sure you haven't done that. So let's run the application again and see if it's what we want. Do 10%, 15, 20. Perfect. So with that, I think we will end this video and probably end working on this program. I don't know that there's too much else to learn from it. If you have any questions, let me know.